Those devilish executive recruiters. You can't live with them. You can't live without them. Have you ever worked with an executive recruiter? It took you a long time to get on their radar screen. You're into the process and all of a sudden it seems like they dropped you like a hot potato. If that ever happened to you, come on board. We're going to show you exactly what to not do so that you can maintain a long-term healthy relationship with a great executive recruiter or recruiters who can help you find those coveted dream roles. Welcome to the Dream Job America podcast. I am your host, Tim Tonella, and this is an area where we talk about all things hiring, particularly strategies, tools, and tactics for finding your next dream job. Now, today we're going to talk about executive recruiters and executive recruiting. Now, this is something I know a little bit about because I have worked with executive recruiters for most of my career over many, many decades. When I was a corporate executive, I actually used lots of retained executive recruiters, and now for 15 years I've run a very successful national retained executive recruiting firm. So I think we have a good perspective on this. Now, for many of you, you're thinking, well, why are we talking about what not to do instead of what to do? So in a future video, we're going to talk a lot about how you build relationships with executive recruiters, how you get on their radar screens, how you build those long-term positions so they want to continually call you back as you evolve through your career. But I find a lot of times trying to get people to adapt something new, to learn a new skill, to maybe try something different, what do they have to do to build that relationship can often be difficult, and it takes a little while for that to stick. But what's a lot easier in many cases is when you see a couple big major faux pas areas that will cause someone to get thrown out of a process and never get called back again. Maybe it's easier just to do a quick video and show you what not to do so you don't run into that situation. Now, we're going to talk about the top 5 things that I see that you don't want to do to destroy that relationship with the recruiter and get thrown out of the process. Now, this is not a comprehensive list by any means, but these are kind of the 5 biggest buckets of things that we see kind of every day when we're working on engagements that will cause a candidate who's otherwise doing well. And in that person's mind, they may think they're doing well, but is going to cause them to get dropped out of a process and maybe put on that B, C, D, or F list, which is the do not call list for all recruiters moving forward. So let's get into it. Number 1, do not make your case as a generalist. Now, what I mean by this is when I look at LinkedIn profiles, I look at resumes, or I hear people talking about their overall career. And again, I'm usually speaking with executives at the C-suite level and VP level. So these are the senior level team leaders and folks that are running the companies. When they start to look for something new, because they've got such a long career with a lot of diverse experiences, they tend to just kind of put it all forward and they position themselves as kind of this jack of all trades who can do anything. Again, thinking that recruiter is going to go, wow, this is amazing talent. This person can do anything, work in different environments, different types of positions, and that's going to be attractive. Now, I'm not saying you should never have that conversation when you meet with the executive recruiter, but your basic messaging when you're talking to a recruiter, at least on the first opportunity in which you may actually be responding to an opportunity they're calling you for or something that you hear about that they're working on, you have to make sure you're specific around the needs for that engagement. Now, most recruiters and most companies are trying to solve a problem. So people just don't generally wake up one day and say, oh my gosh, I think I need a VP of sales, or I think I need a CFO. Although that does happen at the very high levels, when you're going to actually hire an executive recruiter, make that type of commitment. You're going to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for placement fees. You're going to do this very selectively, and usually the position the company's looking to hire is one that's very important because they're trying to solve a very specific problem. They're looking for someone that we consider a high impact player, which is someone that has the ability to literally move the needle and change the trajectory of that company. In order to do that, we're generally not looking for a jack of all trades. We're looking for someone with very, very deep experience in one specific area that has been replicated over time. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with talking about your background, letting people know once you speak with them on the phone that you do a lot of different types of things in the past. You've been successful in a lot of different areas. But the emphasis and the focus and the messaging coming into it really should be very, very direct around that specific engagement or the specific problem that company you're looking at is trying to solve. Now, once you build a relationship, maybe you were a candidate that got to the top 2 or 3 in terms of finalists for an engagement. It didn't work out. Well, now you kind of have a little bit of a relationship with the recruiter. And as you get to know them more over time, you get to share a lot more things about your background and your personality and, what's important and meaningful for you in life. But at least when you're trying to get their initial attention and get to the top of that pack, usually for an initial engagement, you'll want to be very specific. You want to be very tight in alignment. And you want to make sure that you're not kind of spread out across a lot of different areas, because you have to remember the recruiters, we're always looking for a bench of people that are very deep in solving that particular problem. So if you don't make that case, even if you are a jack of all trades and you are good, you may kind of make the B list in terms of the other folks that you're competing against for that position. Now, I'll give you a couple examples of this. If you're applying to companies where the dress code tends to be super casual in some cases, or maybe even business casual in other cases, you don't want to come in dressed in a 3-piece suit and tie. You don't want your LinkedIn profile to look like that. Now, sure, if you're traveling all over the world in a capacity internationally and you're meeting with other executives that dress that way in other countries, that makes sense. Or let's say you're a lawyer and you're presenting in public and that's the way you dress in front of a judge. I got all that. We know that. But generally speaking, when someone's looking at a profile and they're trying to get someone into an informal culture and that person's decked out really formal in a suit and tie, a lot of times it's an immediate turnoff. And we've had clients just say, hey, move on that basis alone. The language you use is really important. So when I was very young in college, I used to actually teach business and technical writing. It was a very formal way in which we used to do things, writing long form letters with salutations like dear sir and madam or dear Mr. Johnson and so forth. A lot of those techniques, the majority of them that we worked on back then, would be completely irrelevant in today's environment where people are inundated with information. It hits a server, it's deleted, it's off the exchange, and you never see them again. So you've got to be able to write very quick, very informal, and very concise. You don't want to necessarily say, dear Mr. Tonella. You may just want to say, hi, Tim. Now, yeah, they can both work. There's no doubt about that. But one may be perceived as someone who doesn't quite get it, that isn't a great cultural fit. You always want to be cognizant of the environment that you're looking to go into and making sure that you match in terms of the language you use, the cadence that you use, the type of energy that you project, certainly the way you dress and you speak. Because if the recruiter senses you're not going to be a good cultural fit, they don't want to waste the limited numbers of bullets that they have in the gun. Remember, we just can't present people ad infinitum, or the clients are going to think that we're not really listening to them or not really getting them and their company, their environment, and they're going to terminate the relationship with us. So it's very, very important that you understand that when you come into it. Number 3, it's so important to try to follow the instructions of the recruiter literally. Now, I say that because when we're evaluating whether we want to present you, put you on that short list, we're evaluating a lot of things. How well you listen to the specific instructions. And if you don't, or you deviate, or you leave a lot of things out, I know you may not think that's a big deal, but the recruiter's thinking, gosh, if this person can't even follow the basic instructions that I'm giving to them as a recruiter, how on earth are they going to be able to do that in front of the client? And moreover, what if they get hired by the client and then it becomes a disaster? They don't listen to anything. And then we've got to go back and conduct a whole nother search at our cost and replace that person. So it's very important to realize we're evaluating everything. So someone says you need to do this, you need to submit that, this information needs to be put in here, you have to respond back by a certain time. You have to be professional, you have to be specific, and you have to show us that you have a strong attention to details. That is one of the quickest ways of getting thrown off that short list and never making that cut. Number 4, do not leave out any critical information. Now, this is really interesting because in today's information world where everything about our lives can often be found online, a lot of people think by leaving out specific information, we're never going to find out about it, or the client's going to find out about it later, or it's not going to be that big of a deal. And here's the problem. Anything, any big red herring, any major skeleton in the closet, anything that's super controversial, it's going to come out sooner or later. I mean, I can do a Google search and I can find out whether you were arrested, when you got divorced, how long you've been married, what your mortgage payments are, and which bank you're using for that, what kind of kids you have, what sports you played. I mean, it's almost unlimited today. Even if you don't post a lot of stuff out there, even those people that don't use Facebook, they're still getting tagged, and a lot of times they still have that information out there. We've had clients look at candidates in the past from other recruiters and internal searches where they found out at the 11th hour that that person had some type of potential criminal charge, and there was a lawsuit filed, and that doesn't come out until much later. The company feels you intentionally withheld that information, and depending upon the time and error that we're in, that may be information that could kill that deal literally immediately. So it's really important, I think, to get that out early. Now, when you're working with an executive recruiter, it's really great because the recruiter is acting as the liaison or the intermediary between the company and the candidate. So a lot of times if you present it to us first and disclose it, it gives us an opportunity to figure out, what's the best way to manage that situations. We may also, in most cases, we will understand the nuances of the company and the culture, and certainly the person you're going to be working for. Hopefully we have a good relationship with that person. We're going to understand what's important to them. In many cases, these issues may not be that important. In other cases, they may, and that's going to be very important for us to address it with you in advance so that we can prep you so it doesn't become something bigger than it really is. But by withholding it, it's like when your child tries to lie to you and they think they're doing a great job, and all of a sudden at the 11th hour, it's so obvious and they get caught. Again, the best thing to do is to just bring it forward first and try to mitigate any risk moving forward. And as an ally, we're going to try to help you do the best to prevent that from happening. And number 5, perhaps the most important, do not try to go around the recruiter. Now, this happens all the time. So for those of you who have never really worked with kind of the higher level retained recruiting firms, we are actually paid money in advance to go out and conduct a search. And usually we're being brought on board because we have a very specific process. In many cases, that process involves extreme confidentiality. We may be replacing someone at a position and the client doesn't want that information to go out because that employee may still be there. Or maybe they don't want to send signals out to the marketplace that they're making a change or bringing somebody in. They may consider that a competitive disadvantage. So we're brought in for confidentiality and to conduct a very specific process so that we're benchmarking people consistently, which is something the company does not have to necessarily do on their own. So very, very important. If you try to circumvent that process, you think, hey, I'm not going to make the list. I'm going to go, I figured out who the company is. I'm going to go to their boss directly. It generally will result in some pretty dire consequences for you. Number one, in most cases, the company's just going to let us know, and they're going to say, what do you think of this guy? Can you throw him in the process so that you can evaluate him consistent with the other candidates that you have in the pipeline? So you're going to get busted right off the top for that. We are going to find out. Remember, we're getting paid the bulk of our fee no matter what, whether it's a success or the search goes on much longer. It's not like they're going to save tremendous amounts of money by hiring you and saving on a fee. They've already paid a big portion of that fee anyway. So again, the opportunity is more than not, the company's just going to call us and they're going to ask if we've ever heard of this guy. The other thing you have to remember is we have that initial communication history with you, and most of the recruiters' contracts make the case that if somebody talking to goes around them, they're still considered part of that process anyway. Now, the biggest issue, of course, the obvious one is if a recruiter thinks you're circumventing them, you're going to end up losing that relationship to begin with. And you have to understand, there's a lot of value in having that relationship with the recruiter in the first place. We are your ally. We're trying to help you put the best foot forward so that you can get hired somewhere. Now, of course, we've got to find the best people for the client, but when we have good candidates, we're there to kind of work with them to make the whole thing work out. So we are in your camp. We also are great lead gen for future jobs, obviously. You know, I joked once that this is true. The average tenure for a CEO in the Silicon Valley for a startup company is between 1 and 4 years. And most people that are in a specific space, like our space, with this early stage, venture-backed senior level placements, people in those environments, they tend to want to stay in that environment. People don't want to work for a startup and then go all of a sudden become, you know, a division president of a big company. They tend to stick in an area that gives them meaning and fulfillment. So they're going to iterate this process multiple times over their career, and having that good relationship with the executive recruiter is really going to be important to them in many, many different ways. So my best advice is don't try to circumvent the recruiter. Be part of their process. And remember, if it doesn't work out for you and you're not the right fit for that job, that doesn't mean that you're not a great candidate. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be our number one candidate on another role. It just means the requirements for that particular engagement may have not been the perfect match for you. And if you stay with us and you maintain that kind of level of integrity and trust and confidence, don't be surprised if we call you 2-3 few weeks later and say, hey, loved working with you. Sorry it didn't work out on the last one, but we got a new job and a new engagement. And this time, I think you're going to be one of the leaders of the pack. Keep that in mind. We are your friend and not your foe. Do not circumvent the executive recruiter. Okay, to wrap it up for today, there are many things that we could tell you to do that would be helpful in building a relationship with the executive recruiter. Whether you do all those things or not, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to not have a relationship or not be the right person for the job. But the 5 things I described to you today, if you just bomb on one of those, that could temporarily or permanently destroy that relationship with that recruiter in the future, or even worse, tank your opportunity to secure a dream job right in the middle of the process when you are interviewing, when you may have a shot to make your case to that company. So stick with it. Don't make those faux pas, and look for future videos where we're going to talk about how to build deep relationships and make those connections with the recruiters that can make the difference in your life. Okay, now if you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button and like it. If you have any comments, please leave those below. If there's an area that you'd like us to cover in the future, we'd like us to make some more video content for you, we'd be happy to do that. And again, for joining us today, I wanted to offer you our free 4-step job preparation guide to finding your new dream job. It's absolutely free. All you have to do is look in the show notes for the URL, or look at the URL in the video link, and you'll be directed to a website where you can download that completely free of charge. It is very comprehensive, and if you're thinking about making a change or actively looking, it's going to cover that entire job search preparation landscape and all the different areas where you should be playing and where you're prioritizing your search to find the best opportunities at the lowest level of competition. And for now, I am out, and I will see you on future videos in the weeks to come.